Have you ever noticed how someone will defend free speech one day and then demand someone else be silenced the next? Or how a person might call out cruelty while being cruel in the exact same breath? Yeah, we've all seen it. And if we're being honest, we've probably done it too. This isn't a video about calling people out. It's not about picking sides. It's about understanding how human minds work, including yours and mine. We're going to talk about psychology, and more specifically, theories that help explain why sometimes we hold double standards, especially when we feel morally certain. Now, to be clear, psychological theories, like any kind of theory, they aren't perfect. They don't explain every person every time, but they work kind of like a mirror. Even if the reflection isn't exact, it gives us a chance to look, to reflect on our behavior, our values, and our blind spots. Because when we can see what's really going on underneath the surface, we can actually do something about it. So let's walk through 5 big reasons psychologists think we struggle with moral consistency, and maybe learn how to make a little more room for growth. This one might not be as familiar, but it's worth paying attention to. It's called moral licensing, and it basically means when we feel like we've done something good, we sometimes give ourselves permission to do something not so good right after. Not because we're faking it, but because we feel like we've earned it. Researchers Benoit Monin and Dale Miller first talked about this in 2001. They found that when people act in a way that supports their values, like standing up for diversity, they're more likely to make ethically questionable choices later. Almost like they've punched a moral ticket and they've got some credit stored up. On an individual level, that might sound like, I went to a protest, I spoke out, so yeah, I lost my temper there, but come on, I'm clearly one of the good ones. On a community level, it could look something like, our country believes in democracy and freedom, so if we push our values onto someone else, that's okay because we're the good guys. It's this strange logic where being good once makes us feel above reflection later. It doesn't mean we're hypocrites on purpose. It means we're human. The next one hits a little closer to home because I think we all feel it happening in real time. Self-serving, biased, and motivated reasoning are basically ways we protect our own beliefs. Instead of asking what's true, we subconsciously ask what supports the truth I already believe in. Psychologist Ziva Kunda, and I'm very sorry when and how I butcher these names, wrote about motivated reasoning back in the 90s, and it's only become more relevant today. Think about free speech. Almost everyone says they support it, but often that support is strongest when it's our views being challenged, and weakest when it's someone else's views we find offensive. Same goes for how we watch the news. I might say that outlet over there is biased and say that this outlet instead says it just like it is. And conveniently, the one that says it just like it is happens to be the one that lines up with my values. Even when it comes to law enforcement, we adjust how we feel based on who's involved. So I might say I support the police unless they're coming after someone I like, or the system is broken, unless it's punishing someone I already disagree with. It's not about principle, it's about confirmation. We protect the parts of the world that reinforce our view, and we push back hardest against what threatens it. This next one is big for me because I've definitely fallen into it. Naive realism is the idea that we see the world clearly and others are just wrong. They're misinformed or emotional or biased. But not us, we're just seeing reality as it is, right? Psychologists Lee Ross and Andrew Ward studied this in the 1990s. It showed up not just in politics, but in relationships, families, even friendships. And here's the danger. If I'm always sure that I'm right, I stop listening. I stop learning, and eventually, I stop growing. It reminds me of a line from the movie Inherit the Wind. It's something I've covered before on this channel. There's a beautiful scene where 2 old friends, now on opposite sides, sit on a bench, and one of them says, "Why did you move so far away from me?" The other replies, all motion is relative. Maybe I didn't move at all. Maybe you moved away by standing still. That's how it works. We assume we're standing still, holding the line. But maybe we're not. Maybe the world is shifting and we have to choose whether to move with it or not. Here's another one that often goes hand in hand with naive realism. It's called the fundamental attribution error, and it means we tend to explain other people's bad behavior by blaming their character, but explain our own bad behavior by blaming the situation. So someone might say, she snapped because she's unhinged, whereas I snapped because I had a rough day. We do it without thinking, and it helps us protect our own sense of who we are. The concept was first introduced by psychologist Lee Ross in 1977, based on earlier work by Edward E. Jones and Victor Harris in 1967. In a famous experiment, participants read essays about Fidel Castro. Even when they were told the writer had no choice in what position to take, the participants still assumed the essay reflected the writer's true beliefs. That showed how deep this tendency goes. We assume people's actions reflect who they are, even when the context tells us otherwise. But that's the thing. Context matters, and so do actions. We need both to understand what's really going on. When we look at someone's behavior, we shouldn't ignore what they did, but we shouldn't ignore the pressures or the constraints around them. Where it gets dangerous is when we apply different rules based on who we like or agree with. When we start applying this bias to politicians, leaders, judges, activists, things get messy. We forgive our side with excuses. He was tired, or she meant well, or that's not really what they meant. But we judge the other side with labels: corrupt, evil, power hungry. That's how cults of personality form, when we excuse and defend a person's actions, not based on what they did, but based on what team they're on. If we care about fairness, we have to look at both the action and the context, no matter who we're looking at. Because once we stop doing that, accountability starts to erode from the top down. This last one might sound familiar because it's been memed to death, but it's still a real problem. Whataboutism is when someone dodges criticism by pointing to someone else's bad behavior. Instead of answering a question, they deflect by asking a different one. It became widely known during the Cold War. The Soviets were famous for using it. They'd say, well, you say we're abusing rights. What about racism in America? And now it's everywhere. Left, right, center. No one's immune. But here's the thing. I don't think it's always subconscious. I think in politics, it's often intentional. It's a strategy. Because it works. It distracts, it deflects, and it keeps people from having to answer hard questions. But we don't have to fall for it. If someone's being asked to answer for their actions, it's okay to say, no, I'm not asking about what someone else did. I'm asking about you. Your words, your votes, your choices. And it doesn't have to be hostile. It can just be honest. Because if we keep letting every conversation slide into, well, what about them, we'll never be able to hold anyone, including ourselves, accountable. None of these things mean we're bad people. They mean we're people with brains that like feeling right more than they like being right. But if we're serious about being thoughtful or being fair, then recognizing our own double standards is part of the work. So the next time you feel morally certain, or like someone else is being a total jackass, hypocrite, maybe take a second. Ask, am I being fair right now, or am I just protecting myself? It's okay to stand up and protect your values, 100%. But hypocrisy exists for all of us, and we need to be ready to see it.